Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest session from the BUZZ.travel Expo. It's entitled, Can Technology Be a Force for Good in Travel and Open Source a Major Opportunity? I'm Patrick Richards, and I'm privileged to be your moderator for the session today. I am a board advisor focusing on startups, and I'm also a non-executive director of the European Tourism Association, ETOA. So, it's travel's dilemma. In the midst of an existential crisis, we know we need to invest. We know we need to do more with less. And we know that technology can drive that recovery. However, it's expensive, it often disappoints, and sometimes the reality doesn't meet the promise. How can we achieve more? And how can business owners who are strapped for cash with little income and depleted reserves make the best of it? To debate these issues, I am joined by a distinguished panel who will debate pragmatically how to drive adoption, how to embrace new innovation, especially involving open source. They are by turn all distinguished and influential people from their corners of the industry. And these include Jeff Ernst Friedman, who is the Executive Director of the Open Travel Alliance, Greg Land, the Global Industry Leader for Aviation, Hospitality and Travel-Related Services at IBM, no introduction needed, and Rachel Reed, who heads Communication and Technology at the European Tourism Association, ETOA. Welcome all. So this session will last for 1 hour. I will pose a number of questions to our panelists. I will direct each question to one panelist in turn, but please feel free to chip in should you have further comments, especially if you disagree. At the end, we will be looking to do some Q&A. Please post these on the Q&A button, not onto the chat button. And now I'm going to ask each panelist in turn to expand just a little in telling about themselves. And I'm going to start, please, with you, Jeff, if you could start and speak.
Hello, thank you, Patrick, for having me. As you said, I'm Executive Director for Open Travel Alliance. We are the open source data messaging standard for the travel industry. We are in our 21st year, and we have been connecting all aspects of travel from hospitality, rail, air, cruise, ground transportation, and car rental, and more, bringing about interoperability standard in travel, and are excited to be here.
Great, thanks, thanks, Jeff, and thanks for taking part. Greg, if you could speak to the audience, please.
Sure, thanks, Patrick. So I've been in this role at IBM for about 10 years now, but prior to that, come from 23 years working across the industry. Started my career at one of the US airlines and was there for 7 years, moved to one of the GDSs for about 11 years, then got wooed away by the bright lights of hospitality, worked for one of the global hospitality companies for about 5 years before coming to IBM. So my role at IBM, I'm our global leader for everything under airlines, airports, hospitality, cruise lines, car rental companies, as well as all the intermediaries who distribute and sell travel across the industry. IBM has about 7,000 professionals globally who work in the travel and transportation industry. And as you can imagine right now, we are in the thick working with clients on recovery planning across all the different subsegments of travel providers.
Great. Thank you, Greg, for that introduction. And Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, and nice to connect with everybody today. My name's Rachel Reed, and I head up communications and technology for ETOA, which is the European Tourism Association. We're very proud to have Patrick on our board of directors. We have been a trade association for about 30 years. We're a broad church of European tourism service providers and the people that bring the visitors into Europe. And our vision is all about better tourism in Europe. So everything we do is centered around making things better for the industry and for visitors in Europe. And today I'm hoping to explore about how technology fits that vision, because clearly that has a solid place in making things better, especially during these times.
Well, great. And once again, welcome everybody, and welcome to our audience. So Jeff, I'm going to kick straight in with asking you a question. Clearly, global tourism is practically at a halt at the moment. How can the OTA impact and benefit the tourist sector under these circumstances?
Yeah, thank you. I think, as you stated, the industry is just in a total upheaval, and what does it mean for the future is being written today. And what open travel brings to the table is the interoperability and the opportunity for increased revenue opportunities. And so when you bring an open source solution, you have the ability for companies of all sizes. So you have massive influencers like IBM, all the way down to brand new startups composed of 1 or 2 people. How do they come across to a common standard, a common framework to bring together to provide solutions and innovation and bring that to the table? And that's what the open source world allows to happen.
Great. And Rachel, how do you see, ETOA have been supporting, the sector for 30 years, as you say. How can ETOA help with technology?
Well, I think it's an interesting point, Patrick, because it's really always been important to the industry. But I think, as you alluded to at the beginning, we've struggled with adopting standards. And I think it's largely because it's so fragmented. The landscape is made up of so many small pieces and moving parts. It's just, I think it's a real challenge to get it all to talk to each other and to come together in a cohesive manner. But I think what's interesting and positive for us to see is that a lot of the most successful players currently have a large element of tech adoption, or the owners come from a tech background. And we're seeing that increasingly. And obviously customers are becoming increasingly tech savvy and tech hungry. So say, for example, 30 years ago, nobody booked a tour on their mobile phone. Our members just didn't have to deal with anybody wanting to do that. And I think that's a really big change we've seen over that time. And I think sort of tangential to the fact that it's so fragmented is because there are a lot of small companies and cost can be a barrier. And I think that has held people back. But we do see, as always, a trickle down from the big players and the trailblazers. It always feeds down. And I think we've seen a lot of that in recent years.
And has COVID, or is COVID going to accelerate that process? What's been the effect of COVID?
Oh, yeah. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, the thing you've seen is this drastic disruption to business as usual, if you like, and that presents enormous opportunity for change. Suddenly everything's stopped and people have had to re-examine what's there. And there's a lot of opportunity for new startups. There are gaps in the market. Sadly, we will see some people going bust, and there will be space for people to fill that void. And these new startups tend to be quite fleet of foot. They don't have this massive baggage of legacy systems, which of course is a big issue for lots of our people. They invested in a piece of technology 20 years ago. It's still kicking around and they really can't quite just drop that bag and move on. Whereas a new startup can come in fresh and tends to be a lot quicker at adopting that. And I think that now that we've had this disruption, there's a lot of space for that. People are trying to do more with less, and technology obviously plays a really big part in that because of the efficiency point of view. So, there are lots of spaces on that. And I think one thing I would probably just finish with on that point is I think it's been really exciting to see the redeployment of technology that people had developed perhaps for other things. Say, for example, one of our members, Get Your Guide, had a piece of technology that was really about addressing over-tourism, which, I mean, obviously not an issue now, but up until only a few months ago, we were all talking about addressing over-tourism. They had an app that would help you find less crowded places so that you didn't have to queue. Of course, now we're seeing that being redeployed as a less crowded place from a health and safety point of view. And I think there are lots of opportunities of redeploying this kind of crowd control technology to be more around the health and safety aspect of it. So I think we'll see a lot of that.
So if you see, let's follow up on that a little. If you see a lot of new businesses using new technology coming into the space, do you see the whole ecosystem being revolutionary rather than evolutionary?
I'd like to say so, but I don't think so. You know, I think there's always an element of evolving from what we've got, because some businesses can't just kind of dump something and pick something up totally sort of revolutionary. But what I think it will do is make people innovate who might have been a bit slower. You know, they've got a real business need to innovate now, and it's top of the list, and there aren't any excuses. I think sometimes the industry's had somewhere to hide, and there's nowhere to hide, and people need to do it. And I think it gives them a reason to prioritize it.
That's a great.
I think that's a great point, Rachel, about being just the force to change right now. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that when you have a few dominant players that can kind of slow innovation because it's potentially not in their best interest to move forward. And now we're seeing that off the table because all of a sudden contactless is an aspect, a need across the entire industry. It didn't exist a few weeks ago or a few months ago. Maybe some people preferred it or liked it, but now it's a requirement. So who is going to deliver that first? And I think creating that environment to deliver solutions and allow the best one to pop up first in those, because the individuals are the same who are traveling before and now. So when you talk about evolutionary versus revolutionary, it's the people still need to catch up with the expectations they pushed forward, but those still people are wanting to change that fits with their level of comfort. And I think that level of comfort is now, it means something else, and we're kind of all collectively figuring out what that might mean today.
So you're Jeff, just following up on that, you're sitting in the global hub of technology development in California. Have you seen Silicon Valley take any different direction since COVID?
I think there's already something new all the time, all over the world, and then particularly in the Silicon Valley. So we're seeing these changes, how you order food, how you get from point A to point B, whether it's a car, an electric scooter, or whatever is always up in the air. So I think we're just seeing a constant churn, and what is being considered part of travel is what is changed, because now you can order food out and get it delivered is a regular thing. It used to be limited to, maybe pizza and Chinese here. Growing up, those were our two options. Now it's anything. And I think now when you can go travel, you can get any food anywhere, and that's becoming part of the travel and tourism experience. And so I think that's the innovation. And just with blockchain technology, how does that fit in? Loyalty points are changing. The whole ecosystem is changing, and I think it's just what becomes part of the experience is going to be decided in the months ahead. So it's really more options are out there, and we'll see what the market decides.
Sure, thank you. So Greg, coming to you, a lot of people perceive IBM to be, in the space of mainframes and Fortune 500 companies. Where are you now in the travel space, and where can you give the greatest contribution from an IBM perspective?
Yeah, well, we still have a few of those mainframes out there, not as many as before. It's still, the predominant way that large transaction volumes are processed, both in travel and banking. And if you look just at the travel industry, 80% of every travel reservation in the world is processed through IBM technology in one way or the other. So we have a pretty broad footprint when you look at the travel industry. We've been innovating in the travel industry for 50 years, going all the way back to creating the original, Sabre GDS technology with American Airlines, creating the first airport kiosk with American Express and American Airlines. So we have a pretty long history in travel, but our business has transformed quite a bit. We're not so much in the hardware business anymore. We're primarily a software and a services company now. And our real focus is on cloud-based platforms and cognitive-enabled solutions. So when you look at the travel industry space, we do have an IBM travel platform. It's built around 3 pillars of travel retail, travel operations, and travel maintenance. And in each of those pillars, you have everything from AI-based algorithms, doing things like predictive maintenance, or creating algorithms to drive one-to-one personalized marketing, things like that. But pretty broad footprint across all subsegments of travel. When I look at the IBM travel platform, some of our biggest innovation here lately is definitely in the realm of digital transformation with all different types of travel and tourism companies. And that includes everything from, Watson-based applications for chatbots to drive efficiency and effectiveness on a call center, or AI-based algorithms behind a mobile application to push customer information down and drive specific customer insights to an agent, or somebody working at an airport or in a hotel lobby. So mobile is what is really kind of changed the game. So mobile coupled with AI to really filter and synthesize the data that's pushed to a mobile application. But if you think about most staff across travel providers and in tourism as well, they're inherently mobile. They're out working in the field, they're out engaging with the customer. So mobile has become a really big enabler, and we partnered with Apple about 5 years ago now and have a joint design methodology and a joint development methodology with Apple. And that's where a lot of these applications are coming from, is from that collaboration with Apple that we started 5 years ago. Jeff mentioned contactless travel. In the realm of kind of recovery planning for COVID-19, that's been a huge topic for us. Looking at how customer applications on the traveler side can communicate with an airport employee or an airline employee or a destination manager and be able to have device-to-device, completely contactless exchange of information to facilitate physical distancing. It's going to completely transform the way we move through airports, the way you move through a hotel, being able to monitor crowd density through a mobile app to see, what's the crowd density around the pool? What's the crowd density at the restaurant or the lobby bar right now? So mobile and a lot of the visual analytics in the AI realm that can be leveraged behind that, that's a lot of what we're looking at right now, and is definitely floated to the top of what companies are looking at as far as how technology is going to completely retool the way we operate and the way we travel in a post-COVID world. And I know we're here to talk about technology, but I think it's not only technology, it's also retooling and rethinking business models and processes as well. Because we're all going to manage information about the traveler in different ways going forward, and that's going to affect some processes as well.
So of your 7,000 folks who you reference working on travel and technology around the world, how have their lives changed since COVID? How much of their direction of travel has gone off at a different tangent since let's say February this year?
Well, a good chunk of our professionals at IBM have always worked virtually. So as professionals, we've been able to be productive and work in a virtual environment like this. And we've moved all of our collaboration methodologies with how we work with clients to be virtual as well. So we have a garage method for development where we're sitting side by side with developers at a client. And now that's being done through virtual mechanisms where we can collaborate with virtual tools like this. Same thing with all of our design thinking methodology. All that's set up in virtual environments now. As far as our travel for business, right now, we're being very careful and following country by country guidelines and state by state guidelines here in the US, sometimes county by county, and just being very careful. But in many cases, we're also following the direction of our clients. So some of the, the airlines have continued to operate even through lockdowns in many countries. So in some cases, we've had to get face to face with some of our airline clients, and we have many professionals that are embedded inside our clients' offices, managing their technology and managing their IT operations that they outsource to us in many ways. So we do have a lot of situations where we do have IBM professionals still working inside a client's office environment or frontline technical environment where we're supporting those, and they've continued to operate through the lockdown in many countries.
Sure. And how, Greg, one of the themes that we're talking about here is, especially within Europe, 70% of the ecosystem is made up of SMEs. Yeah. How do you as IBM work with all of those mega airlines and huge companies, but also work with a more boutique, diverse infrastructure of the SME environment?
Yeah, so the way we're organized around the travel and transportation industry, I'm part of our global leadership team. So we've got a global leadership group that really kind of drives the offerings and taking the offerings and making them be usable by different markets around the world. But then we also have geographic leadership for travel and transportation as well. But then most of our delivery is done at the local level. So in a lot of cases, we've got relationships with local partners, small IT vendors that we work with that in many cases are startups in a particular market. And especially when it comes to data and analytics, you sometimes need that local expertise and even a local IT vendor to partner with. So we're not always doing it alone. In many cases, we are collaborating with local SMEs, with local startup IT companies and vendors. So that really helps facilitate working with the broad spectrum of different size of companies and different segments across the travel industry.
Thank you. And Rachel, if I can sort of put a similar question to you, bearing in mind that 70% of the infrastructure in Europe is SMEs. You said that many, there's a trickle-down effect from some of the larger companies to the smaller companies. Is that the best way to get rid of the fear factor that we identified, or do you have some other solutions?
I don't know if it's necessarily the best way. It's just the way that it often happens because people can see it working. I think you more need trailblazers, people who will go out there, set up the technology and go, here I am making a success of it in my business. And if people see those people gaining a competitive advantage, then boy, will they pick up the technology, and I think in a way we're quite lucky in the travel industry in that we do have trailblazers. We have people who often build a business on their own passion or their own experience. And, they are quite willing to try things out, and be the first person doing it. And I think the more you see that, the more people will pick it up. Because I think one thing you've got to remember for an SME, a lot of these technology things are a really big financial commitment. And so they have to think kind of hard about it. And especially, say, obviously recently now we've seen that, the tide can turn in our industry really quickly. As I say, only 5 months ago, top of ETOA's agenda was addressing issues of over-tourism. And the fact that too many people were coming to places and how will we cope with this, etc. And I remember then our CEO, Tom Jenkins, always saying, we're in this is a real luxurious problem to have, folks, and now obviously those words ring very true. And I think people do feel that sometimes about the industry. And when you make a long-term commitment in technology, it is taking a step into the unknown because you don't necessarily know what your finances will be like in 5 years' time. If you miss a season of bookings, that can really tip an SME if you've got these big commitments. Which is why, I think, obviously, I'm sure you'll be coming around to this in a bit, but the whole concept of open source and access to these things is a real door opener for SMEs.
We will be coming round to that in just 1 second, but I'm going to put one more question to Greg first around that cost. Do you feel costs of technology are coming down? And how do we make it more affordable and less risky on that note, Greg? You're on mute.
I knew that was going to happen. You know, if you look at our software business, we've pretty much moved everything to software as a service. So that does make it more affordable because you're not on a license basis, you're just paying for what you use. So that alone makes the cost more variable, and that's helped a lot. But then also, as we've moved more platforms to the cloud, we also offer platform as a service and infrastructure as a service that makes it much more affordable. You don't have to invest in the big hardware. You don't have to have the staff to manage it on your own premises. So all of that has helped bring down the economies of working with some of these new leading edge technologies. But then also, we are firm believers of you really get the best results when you can get these capabilities in the hands of the developers. So for several years now, we made a big push to really embrace open source. That's why we acquired Red Hat and are able to manage in multi-cloud environments and manage across a variety of open source platforms. But also we now have IBM Cloud Lite. And IBM Cloud Lite, you can join completely free. It gives you 40 plus available services that you can download and try and play with, and you only get charged for it when you actually use it to develop something. It's being used a lot with DevOps environments. All of our Watson APIs are available, so you can actually go in and download 40 plus Watson APIs and play around with AI capabilities as well. And that's where we've really seen the biggest change in working with a variety of different companies across travel and tourism, because even the smallest companies can use those types of tools, apply open source standards, and really make use of just about any of the capabilities that we have out there in the market.
Great. And presumably, Jeff, that's why Greg is working together with you guys on the OTA.
Absolutely. IBM is a significant contributor to open source broadly, you know, outside of travel across the board, and it has been an innovator and leader in that realm. And then open travel specifically, because they bring an expertise of different industries, of different verticals together, and they see the value, if I may speak for you, Greg, of that by coming with a common standard to connect these together, it's a better implementation across the board. So it's easier to move from one to the other, establish partnerships, etc. And then I think the cloud aspects, where we talk about scale, a small startup can pitch and demo their product, and then once it's adopted in the industry, allows them to scale and take advantage of new opportunities that way. So it's an open door policy that allows people to innovate, get products out there, and it either becomes a standalone product, standalone company, or eventually potentially gets bought up by another company and integrated. And your ability to get in on the ground floor is helpful.
And does that make it easier, if you like, to flip between different providers?
Exactly. I think it's a term that is called a vendor lock-in. So if you start off in another cloud provider out there, and so especially in Europe with the data requirements in how, you know, in Germany your personal data needs to live inside that country if you're a citizen. I may be speaking out of turn about the specifics, but there's different rules in different locations and different governments, and your ability to do that, and how one cloud provider handles how data is shared on a server versus another may make your choices about how you expand and scale or move from one country to another. And so I think that's helpful with open source standards. You build for one, and it's able to move across the other, because when you're selling a travel product, there's no interest in, well, which cloud are you on? Nobody buys your particular travel for that reason. Is like, is there good uptime? Is it accessible on my phone, etc.? And that's what allows the individual vendors to decide, this is the best cloud solution for me today, maybe a different one tomorrow, or maybe both, which Greg was alluding with the multi-cloud, and he can speak much greater to that aspect. But that's open source allows you the fluidity to move between solutions that is best suited for your business.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, because multi-cloud is going to be the norm multi-cloud is going to be the norm going forward, because you may host your applications on one cloud and your customer data may sit on another cloud, and the two can work together. So it's just going to be the norm going forward, and open source standards are going to be what makes that even simpler for everybody.
So Jeff, for those private sector businesses that are out there, that like the sound of that, how should they be engaging with open source for one, and two, the Open Travel Alliance as a secondary question?
Yeah, so the open source broadly is, there's many organizations that handle those, and I think that goes back to the getting it into the hands of the developers. They're going to create solutions, innovative solutions, and so they're going to look out for opportunities that is going to be beneficial to the industry and the skill set that they have. So one of the typical advantages for open source is the low cost to use it. It's a universal application for APIs or cloud. You can use in one industry versus another, and that's helpful and lowers your cost for development, quicker time to market, and faster to innovation, as Rachel has talked about quickly. Is the innovative person who could say, what is the industry need today, and how does it change over the next couple months, and can you adjust that, and can you partner with another organization that is using similar technology, so there's not a bridge between those. So that's the general advantages for open source. You have a whole community that works together to build on the technology that is not the differentiator between companies. Open Travel specifically is all of our data messaging is available online for free with no licensing. So something's close to 95% of all travel messages, companies use it in some way or another, and it's available out there. There's no additional fee as a whole, and so that's our advantage. Of course, we're a membership-based company. We're looking for innovators to come in and join and help produce that, but the end result and adoption is what we're after. So you can go to opentravel.org and go to our specification and download it and connect with us, and we're happy to connect new innovators with our architects to talk about how to get things connected.
Great, thank you. Greg, let me come back to you. Obviously IBM is working across fintech and medtech and many different technology in many different industries. If you were to mark the travel industry's homework on our adoption of technology, how many marks out of 10 would you give us? And what are the biggest opportunities for us to learn from other sectors?
Yeah, I'd be generous in giving it a 7 out of 10. It's probably slightly below that. And I say that because, I benchmark regularly against financial services and retail sectors within IBM, because what we tend to see is those industry segments tend to set the expectation with the consumer. And within 18 to 24 months, that consumer expects those same capabilities in the technology world from their travel providers. And so we tend to lag behind retail and financial services, including banking. But when I look at, just in general and on a global scale, we've all become quite comfortable with checking in on our mobile app, picking your seat or picking your hotel room, things like that, and requesting certain services from our travel providers and even tourism companies. But I also know a lot of clients who don't even have a mobile app yet, haven't moved to agile development, haven't even considered moving applications to the cloud, don't have their arms around their customer data. And how can you really develop these services if you don't really understand who your customer is? So I think there's so many ways where we need to catch up. But then when I also benchmark against some of these other industries, we're not even at a critical mass on some of these things like data and analytics and using open standards broadly to even begin to start some industry level transformation. And if you look at the things we need to think about as we come out of this period right now and start operating in a post-COVID world, there are things that we need to transform at an industry level. Digital travel credentials, so everything can be biometric and completely touchless. Integrating health information, integrating health monitoring, from airports to cruise ports to when you enter a hotel. And as an industry, we're really not ready to transform things at that level. And so I think we've got to get at a critical mass still with mobile technology, with leveraging cognitive data analytics to really do some broad scale analytics around our customer information, but also using those capabilities to optimize our operations as well. Probably when we first got into, working with clients after this pandemic hit, step one was crisis management. And with that, it was a lot about taking costs out of the business and looking at how they could optimize how they operate. Then they gradually pivoted to thinking about recovery and all the things they need to retool as we come out of this, and they operate as a much leaner, more optimized, in some cases smaller business as travel does start coming back. But I would say, we're a bit behind. Jeff, you referenced restaurants and fast food, how quickly they adapted to contactless service models when this pandemic hit. We still have airlines that can't adapt to that in different parts of the world, let alone hotels and local destination management type, excursion type businesses. So I think we have a long way to go in embracing just some basic technical capabilities to be able to do that type of industry level transformation.
The way I think that's so accurate, the way I refer to it is 30% syndrome, that even businesses that have adopted technology, the adoption is so traumatic for them that they've kind of, it fills 30% of their needs, but they don't push on to another stage.
Yeah.
Getting people to do manual workarounds and things like that. Would you recognize that scenario, Greg?
Yeah, no, definitely. And, even as I got involved in some of the recovery task forces across the industry, I was surprised how many travel companies wanted to put paper processes and manual processes in place for capturing some of the information we need to start capturing to facilitate contact tracing and to facilitate health monitoring. And it was tough to convince them it's so easy and cheap to prop up a quick mobile application to capture this information in a digital format. And that's where our minds need to be, because we're going to have to show compliance against this information, whether it's for regulatory agencies in each of the countries, or even if it's just to show transparency to the traveler that we are doing a good job following these protocols and capturing this information that's going to be regulated in many countries. And I think in some cases, especially for crossing borders, we're going to have to get very sophisticated in how we capture and track health certification. Even if it's after we have a vaccine in place, many countries are going to require that you show proof that you have been vaccinated. I can't imagine doing that on an arrival card and just trusting self-service, self-reporting information on that. And then also already with contact tracing too, we can't do that manually. That's not something that can be done with paper. There are mobile technologies, and most travelers travel with a smartphone these days. It's so easy to do that through the mobile technology that's there. And we've got to quickly get open standards out there so anybody locally can develop contact tracing applications or even embed it in their existing travel application or travel mobile apps for their travelers to make that possible in a very easy way.
Well, I think you've been on the WTTC task forces, haven't you?
Yes.
The World Travel and Tourism Council, and they're in the whole streamlined traveler process, yeah, and there's a recovery. Are those the task forces you are referring to, and how's that going?
Yeah, no, I mean, so WTTC, IATA, ACI, the CDC has put out protocols for the cruise lines to lift the no sail requirement. So there's a lot going on. And I think we're in that window right now where all of these standard setting bodies have issued guidance and protocols. And now we're waiting to see which of these are going to actually be regulated by governments. Because a lot of this is going to come down to what is required for crossing borders. I think we're at the point where we need to get aggressive in actually translating those protocols into technical standards. Because right now they're just protocols. Nobody's really kind of nailed down specific technical standards for most of this. And so I think we're at the point where we've got to get aggressive. So we've been partnering with airlines, hotels, GDSs to look at how we can start getting pilot programs out there to start setting those standards. I don't want to wait for a government agency to give us technical standards, or we'll be waiting for a long time. And I think if we want to get out of this this window of quarantines, which just isn't making it easy for especially business travelers to get back out there. If every time you cross the border, you've got to quarantine for 14 days before you can get out and enjoy sightseeing or go get out of your hotel to go to a business meeting, that's just not going to work very well. So we've got to get technology deployed to facilitate contact tracing when you enter a country, and also, you know, adapt to testing everywhere, but testing in a way that it can be captured and tracked as part of the contact tracing infrastructure in each country. So I think we're at that point where we need to get aggressive with technical standards on this stuff.
So to that point, the world is talking about when there will be a vaccine.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it back to you, Greg. When will that technological solution be ready in your view? How long?
Gosh, I mean, I try to speak with my colleagues in healthcare and life sciences on a weekly basis, and you know, we've donated supercomputing time and lots of cognitive, you know, capabilities to help in the effort to find a vaccine. But I'm not close enough to that to know when it's going to be. But
sorry,
I think
I didn't mean that. I meant, you know, the vaccine being, you know, the holy grail. But
yeah.
For us in travel side is, when will that aggression with technology come to fruition? What's the timeline, do you feel?
So yeah, because on a lot of the task forces, we kind of look at everything before a vaccine and after a vaccine. That's how we kind of draw the line of embarkation there. And so right now we're assuming that throughout this year, we need to manage in the current environment, and that at the earliest 2021 would be when we could start pivoting to look at how the processes could start migrating to a post-vaccine type of process. But then when you think about getting the vaccine distributed and getting everybody vaccinated, I think we're going to have to manage in a before and after vaccine world probably for a couple of years, because I don't think we'll have herd immunity or a broad enough vaccine. So right now we're planning for a before and after vaccine world, and we're developing processes and technology to manage in both arenas.
Great. Rachel, you know, ETOA has been so involved in what you might broadly call the plumbing of travel, working with a lot of SMEs on the ground within Europe, and has gone into point of sale systems that actually, when you're looking at the B2B logistical side of tourism, there's still far too much paper, manual workarounds, etc., etc. How do you see the future developing on that?
But as Greg was speaking as well, there were so many other points which I'll come back to as well, around this whole focus on the visitor experience in destination and how technology can help with that, because obviously that's of absolute prime concern to all of our members, is people, and they can't have that cultural experience, then they're not going to want to come. So, you know, that's really, really central. So I'll come back to that bit in a moment. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Patrick, because listen, the customer comes first. So it's obviously a natural thing that the investment is always in the customer facing stuff, making your product available, making it appealing, and giving people channels through which to buy it. You know, obviously you have to invest in that, because if you don't have that, then you haven't even got any customers coming in. And I think that's always because we're all doing it with each other. And it's like, I'm not giving a customer a ratty little piece of paper. I'm giving another supplier a ratty little piece of paper, and he's got to look after it somehow, you know. So I think that's really where that comes from, because the industry is so customer first. Everything goes to the customer, and then we have to pick up the pieces behind, I suppose. But what I think is interesting is, you know, you can harness some of the same principles. So when you've got this notion of standards and this idea of embedding technology, it's not that difficult sometimes to get the rest of your stuff on board. I mean, when you think of attractions, Patrick, you imagine only say, even probably you spoke to people at our events 5-6 years ago that still didn't have real-time inventory available for their bicycle tours, for example. You'd have to ring him up and he'd go, oh, let me just look in the book and I'll tell you if that slot's free, get my pencil out, you know. So we still only had that maybe 5 years ago. And you now look at some of our members that are in the attraction space, like Klook and Tickets, people like that, who have got enormous amounts of innovation that's come up only in the last few years. And I think in a way with the plumbing, you can sort of stand on the shoulders of giants, if you like, because all this other stuff's already there. You can go, oh, I'll pick up these best 3 bits from what we've learned in marketing and distribution, and I'm going to then stick that through my B2B channels, and I'm going to harness that, and then I've suddenly got the whole picture. So I think we will see a lot of that. I think we'll probably come on to kind of some of our key areas of focus in a bit, but things like ground transport, you would probably, want to see better links between that and, say, a hotel, or a restaurant or an attraction. And particularly if things change, because obviously things on the road change when visitors are out. I can't just rock up, I need to book it. And I'm going to be late because my train is late. What do I do about that? And at the moment, we don't really have much facility other than trying to get through to somebody at that place for you to do anything about it. And I think it would be great to see these kinds of developments. And I think we will, because there will be a need for it now, because one of the sadnesses is we may lose spontaneity in terms of visitor experience in destination. I will have to book everything, otherwise I won't be able to go in, because of, Greg was mentioning, in terms of the focus on visitor experience in destination and kind of having to comply with all of these protocols and demonstrate compliance with health and safety mandates and all these sorts of things. And I definitely smiled when you said you'd be waiting a long time for a government agency to tell you what that should be. And I think that really spoke to me, because at Itoa, we have a very well-established reputation as being a kind of public-private sector. Government agencies cannot do this on their own. They need to talk to industry and say, how would that be, and float ideas. And I think now more than ever, there is that need to be all these new protocols. And we all want to make sure that visitors have the best experience possible, and it doesn't take them 83 years to get through the airport and all these other things. Enormous desire now, because we have got to have all these protocols in place that will affect how people view their trip. And I think that's a really important point.
Folks listening to this who say, okay, open source standards, great, but aren't you dumbing down my intellectual property?
There's definitely that criticism has value, but I think the open source allows for where you can agree on a common standard where there is no business advantage one way or another. So if we're coming up, when you check into a flight or a hotel, there's no real business advantage for first, last name, nation of origin if you're traveling over a border, etc. So let's all agree to a common standard on what that is. So when you check into an air experience and rail and hotel, you can share that data across services you can provide on top of it, is where there is a benefit. So I think that's the travel experience that we're looking for in the open source.
So this makes it easier for companies to speak to each other. It makes it easier for software companies to spend more time on the sexy stuff.
Yeah. It's really when you book a hotel, air, and ability to your flight is canceled or delayed, and it can inform the other parts of your journey. So if you're a delayed flight, the car rental knows that you're on its way, and they have the inventory issue that Rachel talked about with bikes. Car rental has a similar issue, so they know to still expect you to be there in the car. The hotel can know this is the license plate number of this car, so they know where you're parked and that you're allowed to be there, and you can even inform them that you're in a meal for you before you get here. And I think that allows that interchange of information. The standard across that is going, or third parties in between.
Which are the key verticals that you're working on now, Jeff?
I think we had a really productive conversation with addressing climate change is a big concern, is going to be an addition to the COVID recovery for Europe, and that plays a significant role. I think the interoperability amongst the different partners is where we're also pointing to. So I think we're continuing to invest to benefit from the staycation as well as bringing it in today. So we're looking at
a lot of our clients, and before the pandemic, it was a big focus of a lot of POCs and other pilot programs where an airline wants to work with a hotel company and vice versa, that end-to-end experience. So
between ETO and resonate with you and
these things, their experience, what would add into that's also joined up in some provider, or you can't rely on something that they would have the capacity. Well, we still have a fair proportion of members that operate most from standards. I mean, our focus, all these doors to these cope with all these very interested in this and have produced their twin pillars of recovery for the industry.
Stats and the environment generally. I saw an interesting stat from a 2016 survey, which said that 91% of people booked a restaurant either in person or normally over the telephone. Well, you know, in a world where restaurants have got to collect customers, that's a good name for a session, Breeze, Birds and Builders, because it maybe is a good analogy for where we need to take the tourism business.
Yep.
One final question for you each. If I can go round, I'll start with you, Rachel. One key initiative that you feel that we can adopt or we should be doing to drive forward technological adoption in the current environment?
I would say it would be sharing the debate, because so much of the industry operates in little silos. And I think if we have a proper technologically facilitated debate, obviously we have so much technology now that people from all around the world can be involved. And I think it's actually having that proper consensus around what standards should look like in one place instead of 75 places all over the world. I think that would probably be the first place we could start.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I think the bringing together the different standards and bringing them closer together as much as possible, and before standards are created, looking to those that are already out there and are similar, and how can we make this work together. So we have the seamless traveler journey. You're moving across with the airport, checking in. You know, can other industries just adopt a similar data messaging standard that's already in place, either add to or take away, depending on it is necessary, versus coming up with a different need? I think looking to how things are similar from the experience of the traveler and using the standards that are out there is an approach that'll make it easier to adopt it and innovate. And then we can focus on enhancing what is out there versus coming up with a different version of something else.
Thank you, Jeff. And finally to you, Greg.
You know, I would say, just in the spirit of agile, you know, keep it simple, think small, but run fast, because we've got to drive a lot of change in a short period of time if we're going to facilitate travel coming back after something like this. And I think it's easy to get overwhelmed because you overthink something. And so I think start small and keep it simple and just run as fast as you can.
Listen, thank you so much. You're all fabulous. You've done a great job. So, you know, on behalf of the participants, thank you to Rachel. Thank you to Jeff. Thank you to you, Greg. Really interesting conversation. Thanks for all our participants for sticking with us through all of this. And thanks to Jan and all of the BUZZ.travel team for hosting us. And with that, I close this session.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Be safe out there.
Cheers.